Hi everyone, welcome back to Extra Credit, and this is our 13th episode on the history of Rome. So last time we saw that in the middle of the 1st century AD, a revolution was taking place in the Roman Empire as the Christian faith spread like wildfire from corner to corner of the Mediterranean world. But at the same time, there were other much less peaceful revolutions taking place in isolated pockets here and there around the empire. You see, by this time in their history, the Romans ruled over millions of subject peoples of different languages, cultures, religions, and ethnicities, and as you can imagine, not all of them were, shall we say, tickled pink to find themselves under the dominion of Rome. At times this led to tensions between the Romans and the people that they ruled, and those tensions could sometimes erupt into outright violence. However, as we also know, in situations like these, good political leadership can go a long way to restoring peace and calm, and so it was fortunate for the Romans that their current emperor was such a calm, reasonable, down-to-earth, peace-loving, rational... Oh wait, it's actually Nero. Yeah, this is gonna be bad. So last time we saw that in the year 64 AD, the egotistical emperor Nero was using public land and public money to build one of the most extravagant monuments of all time, a massive palace called the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. But projects like this involved a whole lot more cash than Nero had on hand in the city of Rome, and so to make ends meet, he cranked up the dial on taxation around the empire, forcing subject peoples hundreds of miles away from Rome to pay for Nero's own personal pleasure palace. Which was an amazing idea, said politicians everywhere. Now this kind of behavior wasn't going to win Nero fans anywhere, but it went over especially badly in the province of Judea, which we visited last time. As you remember, Judea was the homeland of the Jewish people who have the claim to fame of being history's first monotheists, meaning that they worshipped only one all-powerful God. The center of Jewish life and culture was the holy city of Jerusalem, and the center of Jerusalem was the magnificent temple to God that had stood there for centuries. Now, the Jews themselves had first been conquered and brought into the Roman Empire about 130 years previously by our good old friend Pompey, whom we met back in episodes 7, 8, and 9. And for most of the time since then, life in Judea had been pretty peaceful. However, starting around the time of Jesus, the Romans made a series of pretty brainless decisions that moved the scale from relative peace to powder keg waiting to explode in just a few short decades. And when the explosion did come, it would take the form of the single biggest rebellion the Romans ever had to deal with in the entire history of their empire, eventually requiring almost a quarter of the entire Roman army from across Europe to restore law and order. So very much like Ron Burgundy, it's kind of a big deal. So what were some of these brainless decisions that resulted in such fury from the Jews towards their Roman overlords? Well, there were several incidents along the road to destruction, but they pretty much all fall underneath the category of the Romans being insensitive jerks towards Jewish culture, history, religion, and tradition. For example, on a couple of occasions, the Romans tried to set up their own religious and political images in the Jewish temple area, which was a huge violation of a sacred site and a big-time no-no. They also showed racial and ethnic discrimination against the Jews on various occasions, and on top of all this, there was the added frustration of having to pay taxes to the Romans when many Jews were having a hard enough time making ends meet as it was. But the straw, or in this case more accurately the anvil, that finally broke the camel's back was provided in the year 66 AD by our good old friend, the unhinged Emperor Nero. Remember that at this time Nero was busy cranking up taxes around the empire to pay for his own extravagant personal projects. And although the Jews could put up with this to some extent, what they couldn't put up with was when Nero had the brilliant idea to get more cash by stealing it directly from the treasury of the Jerusalem temple itself. I can't even really think of an analogy to describe how insanely offensive this was, so I'll just say that it would be like trying to get extra cash by stealing it directly from the Jerusalem temple itself. As you can imagine, the Jewish response to this was, "Sure, you can take the money from our temple, over our dead bodies," to which the Romans responded, "Okay," and thus the Jewish War began. The Jewish War would last for 4 long, agonizing years and go down in history as the most serious challenge to their authority that the Romans ever faced. It was also one of the most shocking and bloody conflicts in Roman history, with horrific acts of violence and vengeance committed by both sides. Now, the man the Romans chose for the job of squashing the rebellion was a straight-talking general named Titus Flavius Vespasianus, or Vespasian for short. Vespasian was a capable commander who succeeded in scoring some early victories against the Jewish rebels, but then in the year 68 AD, something happened that completely changed his own plans and changed the course of Roman history forever. What happened was that back in Rome, the Senate had finally gotten so fed up with Nero being, well, Nero, that they declared him a public enemy and sent their own soldiers to execute him. Nero responded to this by going out in a blaze of self-pity, declaring that the world was losing a great artist in him before slitting his own throat. Now, nobody exactly missed Nero after he was gone, but one thing is for sure, his death made an already complicated and chaotic situation even worse. Now, the Romans not only had a massive rebellion in Judea to deal with, but because Nero had died without leaving any male children, they also had the delightful prospect of a brand new civil war to decide who would become the next emperor. There actually ended up being 4 different guys who wanted the job, which led historians to name the year 69 AD the Year of the 4 Emperors. Yeah, don't pull a muscle there, historians. But the man who ultimately emerged victorious was none other than Vespasian himself, whose loyal soldiers declared that they wanted him to be the top man in the empire. So Vespasian packed his bags and headed off for Rome, leaving his faithful son Titus in charge of bringing a successful conclusion to the Jewish war, which was still a very long way from over. Titus knew that the key to success lay in capturing the Jewish capital of Jerusalem, which was where the Jewish leaders had their stronghold. And so after a terrible siege that lasted for 7 long months, in the year 70 AD, the city of Jerusalem finally fell to the Romans, leaving thousands of Jews dead and their precious temple a heap of rubble. Any Jews who escaped the horrible fate of being crucified on Roman crosses faced the equally horrible fate of being sold into slavery across the empire. Finally, the last remaining Jewish rebels fled to the desert fortress of Masada, where they committed mass suicide in the year 73 AD, finally bringing the rebellion to an end once and for all. In the end, from my perspective, the Jewish War is a pretty bloody stain on the Romans' reputation. After all, it represented a catastrophic loss of life and cultural artifacts, and was instigated by the Romans themselves, whose arrogance and cruelty towards the Jews provoked the rebellion in the first place. However, from the Roman perspective, the Jewish War had some pretty positive benefits for them, namely the fact that they now found themselves the proud owners of thousands of new Jewish slaves and tons of treasure from the Jerusalem temple. And these new slaves and treasure came along at just the right time for the brand new Emperor Vespasian to put them to use on a little project of his that would cause the Roman people to fall in love with him. Bulldozing the enormous palace built by Nero, Vespasian used his resources from the Jewish War to construct a massive new monument that would come to dominate the Roman skyline, symbolize the very city itself, and go down in history as easily the most famous Roman building of all time, the Colosseum. And it's to this building and its own bloody history that we turn next time. And yes, Vespasian, this is where you can say a very big, "You're welcome, Suzanne Collins." Hey everyone, thanks for watching Extra Credit. It's a great time making this show as always, and today's episode was particularly fun to write as I got to do some new research into the Jewish War. Your challenge for this week is to figure out what's going on in this incredibly famous historical etching and to tell me all about it. As always, stay safe, have fun, read a book, and we'll see you back here next time.